consent of the network. We are going to talk about this book tonight. I don't expect all of you to have read it yet because it only came out a month ago. And therefore we are very proud to have its author here at Pakhuis de Zwijger in Amsterdam. We're going to talk about censorship, privacy, human rights. And talking about privacy, you see that we've got cameras stacked here. We are going to film it all. The presentation and discussion, so leave your questions to the end. So at least you have a choice to be online or not, because that's what it will be about tonight. So, yes, we're very proud to have her here. She's been a correspondent for CNN in Beijing and Tokyo. And she's one of the co-founders of the Global Voices Online. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Rebecca MacKinnon.
Let's see if I can get this to work. Good, it's working. Before I begin, I just want to apologize that my publisher was not competent enough to provide books for sale this evening. But rest assured, the book is available on Amazon, and it's also available as an ebook. So I hope that after we've had our conversation tonight, you'll feel inspired to order a copy. And it should be available in European bookstores soon, even though it wasn't available in time for this event. So I begin my remarks today. Let's make sure I can get this to work. Wrong button. There we go. So I'm going to talk a little bit first about the Arab Spring. There's been a lot of hype and discussion in the media about the role that the internet has played, and particularly social networks like Twitter and Facebook have played in bringing people out onto the streets in Tunisia and in Egypt and elsewhere around the Middle East and North Africa, and the role that these networks played in bringing down two dictators and in challenging many others. Although it's somewhat less clear the extent to which these technologies are going to help people build a stable and robust democracy going forward after having challenged the power. And so that's one thing I'm going to talk about. But another thing that's important to point out is that online activism in Tunisia and Egypt and elsewhere in the Middle East, North Africa region has been going on actually since before Facebook and Twitter existed, which somehow the media doesn't always understand. But this is an example of a video that was put online in 2004, soon after the 20th anniversary of a video that Apple Computer had made, an advertisement that Apple Computer made in 1984, in which it was basically a takeoff on George Orwell's 1984 and the use of technology to challenge a dictator. And a Tunisian activist named Riyad Ghirfali, who in 2004 was known online only as Astrubal, created a mashup with this Apple Computer video that I think really reflects the hope that people have and have held about technology and its ability to help people liberate. And by the way, he created this video before YouTube existed and distributed it online. So here we go.
التربية والعمل وطورنا التشريعات بما يرافق الديمقراطية ويشارك
Astrubal called this video Aziza's dream. It was as if the Tunisian people were waking up from a nightmare, or he predicted that one day the Tunisian people would wake up from a nightmare. And lo and behold, it turned out he was one of the activists that was involved in helping the Tunisian people wake up from a nightmare. But In the aftermath of the Arab Spring and the revolution in Tunisia and in Egypt, there have been also some troubling revelations. And a couple of months after Hosni Mubarak stepped down from Tunisia, Mubarak stepped down in Egypt, a number of protesters stormed into the state security headquarters of right outside of Cairo. And these are photographs that activists took while they were going through the state security headquarters. And this is a photo that was posted on Twitter as people were going through and finding all these shredded documents that the agents had left behind before the protesters went in. And also there were a lot of files that had not been destroyed. And some people found their own files, their own surveillance files. And other people found files of people they knew. And interestingly, the information that was collected about people came mainly through electronic sources. There's transcripts of email conversations, Skype conversations that people thought had been secure, their cell phone text messages, their communications online that had been captured through the internet service providers. And some activists also found contracts between Western companies and the Egyptian state security forces for technology called deep packet inspection technology that would assist the government in tracking people's activities online. And so now, even though the Mubarak regime is gone, of course, Egypt is going through a very difficult political transition, and activists are feeling still very under threat. And they're assuming that these technologies are still in use by the transitional government, and that people, as they do try to use the internet to organize and continue to protest, they recognize that they have to be careful because things are being logged, and that the state still has the capability to watch them and follow them and anticipate what they're doing online. Also in Tunisia, recently, the head of the Tunisian Internet Agency, named Moez Chakchouk, revealed that his agency had been testing censorship technology and surveillance technology for Western companies. And then those companies were marketing this technology around the region. And he has declared that he wants to turn his agency from an extension of the Ben Ali dictatorship that was required to censor, that was required to surveil the Tunisian people, into a network that can facilitate a new Tunisian democracy. He wants it to be a neutral network that will enable dissent, that will enable discourse, that will enable controversy. But there's a great deal of argument actually going on in Tunisia right now. And just a couple weeks ago, the Supreme Court of Tunisia made a ruling in response to requests by politicians that had been democratically elected in Tunisia to censor some websites that they believed to be obscene. And there was a big argument going on throughout Tunisian society about what is the role of censorship and surveillance in a democracy. And of course, they look to the West for answers, and they find that we're arguing about these questions as well. And so this gets to the point of my book, which is that increasingly, we as citizens everything we do, increasingly we're dependent on digital platforms, digital technologies and networks. And also our relationship with government is mediated through these online network digital platforms and networks. And so how do we ensure that the network is functioning in a neutral and transparent way, and in a way that favors the citizens and empowers the citizens, rather than favoring the power of government or corporations? And how do you ensure that when government and corporations abuse their power through this network, that they can be held accountable, that we actually know the abuse had happened, and that we can bring consequences to those who abuse power through digital networks? And even in democracies today, we do not have a good answer to that question. And as we see people in new democracies like Tunisia struggling to find answers, I can say, having spoken to some people in Tunisia, that they're somewhat disappointed that the older democracies are not being very helpful when it comes to finding answers. And just how contentious this question has been reflected recently in some political debates in the United States and in Europe. This is a screenshot from January when Wikipedia shut itself down for a day. And when you tried to access any page on Wikipedia, you got this black screen protesting a proposed law in the U.S. Congress called the Stop Online Piracy Act, or SOPA, which was intended to deal with a problem that is considered by people around the world to be a problem, which is the infringement of intellectual property and how do you protect copyright online in a digital age. And so the entertainment industry had proposed a law, which a number of lawmakers agreed was a good idea, that the best way to deal with the problem of piracy online and the sale of copyrighted of pirated goods online and fake goods online would be to censor websites that provide these pirated goods and materials, and also to hold responsible the social networks and service providers for what their users are doing. So basically, if a internet platform, whether it's Wikipedia or if it's Google, if some of its users were using their platform to publish copyright violating content, they could be held legally responsible. And so the internet industry was very concerned that this was going to make it very difficult to run any kind of business that involves user-generated content if you hold the companies legally responsible for what their users are doing. Basically, then the company has to police the users and basically monitor users or surveil them, and also censor users proactively in order to remain out of legal trouble. And companies felt that was going to be problematic, and free expression organizations, the civil society, also felt that that was going to stifle free expression. It was going to put in place mechanisms that could easily be abused, that could easily be expanded for other purposes beyond copyright to other quote-unquote infringing activity. And so, of course, across Europe, there's a trade agreement with the United States called ACTA, the anti-copyright, the anti, counterfeit. That was the word. I'm forgetting my English. The Anti-Counterfeit Trade Act, which people around Europe have been protesting because it has many similar features to SOPA. That civil liberties organizations and internet users are afraid will result in abuse. So it's the same issue, really. How do you resolve problems on the internet that people in democracies want solutions for, but how do you find solutions that are not going to erode rights or that are not going to enable abuse of power through digital networks? Now, at the extreme end, of course, in non-democracies, actually you have very similar mechanisms in place. And this is what most people know as the Great Firewall of China. It's the system that blocks websites, and this is what happens on the browser when you try to access Facebook from the Chinese internet from inside China. You just get an error message saying this page is not available. And this happens, with thousands and thousands of websites in China. But that's only the first layer of censorship in China. That's really only to deal with foreign websites. And actually, the second layer of censorship and surveillance in China involves companies, involves all the internet companies that Chinese internet users depend on. And this is a ceremony I attended in 2009 in Beijing called the Internet Self-Discipline Awards. And this ceremony gave this award to the top 20 internet companies that did the best job of policing and censoring their users. And one of the recipients was a gentleman named Robin Li, who happens to be the CEO of Baidu, China's main search engine, sort of the Google of China, as it were. And so the way it works in China is that because foreign company websites, these Facebook and Twitter and all these social networks, YouTube, Blogger, they're all blocked in China. So for social networking, for most of their search, for most of their online activities, Chinese people are using internet services run by Chinese companies. And the Chinese government holds the Chinese companies responsible for everything their users are doing. And so the Chinese companies have to have entire departments full of people whose job it is to monitor what users are doing in case the company gets in trouble, and to proactively censor. They get instructions from the government, but they're also acting sort of, okay, this might get us in trouble, so let's take it down. Deleting people's accounts, and so on, and handing over information to the police that either the police requested or that they know that the police are going to want. So this is, I think, what many in the West don't recognize about the Chinese internet control system, is that the core component for its success is the private sector, and the private sector cooperation, which is the result of being held responsible, being held liable for what users are doing on their services and platforms. And which is one reason why people like myself were so opposed to SOPA, because legally holding internet platforms and services responsible for what your users are doing, that's a mechanism that is ripe for abuse. It is ripe for expansion of its mission, and I have argued is very dangerous. And this is actually an example of how these companies work. So I tried, this is a social networking platform run by Baidu, and I tried to post a blog about the jailed Nobel Peace Prize winner Liu Xiaobo. And I couldn't even publish the article. It prevented me from publishing the article. So the point is that it's not just about blocking content, it's about keeping it off the internet, it's about deleting it from the internet. So we have a situation with the internet today where sovereign nation states are trying in different ways to control the internet and kind of reimpose borders. You're also having a situation where some nation states, like, for instance, the United States government and SOPA, the United States Congress and SOPA, was seeking to regulate online platforms in a manner that would affect internet users all over the world, because Facebook and Google and so on that would be affected by this law have users all over the world. But those people didn't vote for the U.S. Congress, so they have no way of holding the U.S. Congress accountable. Or when the EU passes laws related to regulating internet companies, of course that ends up having a global effect for the same reason, because these companies have to kind of conform. And then there's a question, when one government is seeking to regulate internet platforms on behalf of their constituents, are they considering how that's going to affect internet users in other parts of the world? And to what extent do they care? And of course, to what extent can internet users in other countries do anything about this? So this is one way in which sovereignty has become kind of mixed up, or it's no longer matching very well in terms of the way in which laws are passed, regulations are passed, the way in which countries try to govern the internet, and in terms of who is accountable to whom. It no longer matches up very well. And then, of course, you have these internet companies that are creating global constituencies. So this is a map from December 2011 of social networks around the world, and every country in blue is a country where Facebook is the most popular social network. And you can see the big red country there, China, and also the Russian-speaking world there, with Russian language networks, through which the Russian government has sort of a special relationship with those networks. They do not block overseas websites right now in Russia, but the Russian state security has, let's say, pretty decent access to material and the ability to put pressure on these companies in ways that can influence people and intimidate people. And then also Vietnam, you can see there in the pink, it's that way for similar reasons as China, that they're blocking Facebook. But on the other hand, of course, you have people using Facebook around the Middle East to organize demonstrations and protests. And so you can kind of see why the Chinese government wants to block Facebook. But in my book, I talk about the sovereigns of cyberspace, because while these platforms in many ways are helping to liberate people in some cases, the people who manage these platforms, the people who write the software, the people who create the hardware, are making a kind of law. It's not a governmental legislative law, but their computer code is shaping what we can and cannot do with our digital lives, and that in turn affects how we interact with the world. Their engineering decisions about how your iPhone works, what you can do on your iPhone, what you can download on it, what you cannot, what it can connect to, what it cannot. That also affects your interaction with the world. It creates certain dependencies. The terms of service that everybody clicks agree when they sign up for the service. The privacy policies, all of these things. The identity policies, whether you can use your real name, whether you can be anonymous, whether you're required to have your identity online linked to your real world identity or not. All of these things affect, in different ways, our rights and freedoms in the physical world. Yet there's a question of how much are these sovereigns of cyberspace considering our political rights, considering our human rights, our civil liberties, when they're making these commercial decisions. So one example, this is a cartoon from Egypt. A lot of people feel that Hosni Mubarak was brought down in large part to Twitter and Facebook, and so this cartoon is reflective of that. January 25th was the first big protest organized in Tahrir Square, and there was this hashtag on Twitter, Jan25, that rallied people. And this person there in the hoodie, and the picture of that person there on the Facebook page, is a young man named Khaled Saeed, who was killed by police brutally in the summer of 2010. They dragged him out of a cyber cafe, and his family thinks that they did this because he was trying to upload some video exposing police malfeasance. And his case kind of became a rallying cry. He became a human symbol of police brutality and torture in Egypt. And so some activists created a Facebook page here, which was meant to organize some anti-torture protests in the summer of 2010 and in the fall of 2010. But there was a problem. These activists didn't dare use their real names in creating this Facebook page because they didn't want to turn out just like this guy. As a result, they were violating the terms of service of Facebook. They were violating Facebook's law. So on the night before a huge demonstration on a Friday in late November, their page went down. It was deactivated. Why? Because the administrators back in California, it had been brought to their attention that the people running this page were not using their real names, and that they were violating the regulations, and that their page had to be shut down. And it only got reinstated because these activists had ties with the international human rights community and with some people in Silicon Valley, and they negotiated a solution where the account got changed to somebody in the U.S. who didn't mind using their real name. But this is just one example of how the commercial decisions and the terms of service of companies, that they're not really thinking about how this affects activists, how this affects people who are using the service, who are the most vulnerable for whom these decisions can really be life and death matters, the extent to which companies are not thinking about these questions, and which raises questions about should we be holding companies more responsible and accountable for these decisions they're making. Similarly, when Steve Jobs died, people around the world were mourning for him, and especially actually in non-democratic countries. It was really amazing, the outpouring that you saw. And this is an Iranian cartoon by Iranian exile cartoonist who created this cartoon soon after Steve Jobs died that says, an old man says to the angel of death, there are many dinosaurs in Iran, and you go after the red apple. And it kind of reflects this notion that for many people in many countries, they have more respect for these CEOs of internet companies than they have for their own leaders. And that's really fascinating, and that's an amazing power that these companies have, that they have these global constituencies who are that loyal to them, and what that means. Yet at the same time, Apple, with its apps in China, Apple sells iPhones and iPads in China, and at the request of the Chinese government, it's censoring the usual things that get censored in China, apps by the Dalai Lama and his supporters and other politically sensitive material. But you're also seeing Apple making decisions about content that go into democracies in troubling ways. So this is a case in 2010 when an American political cartoonist who's quite famous named Mark Fiore, his app was not approved. Apple sort of, censored his app. And his app was basically a series of political cartoons making fun of various American politicians. But Apple's employees who run the App Store decided that this was too offensive for Apple's users, and so they censored this app. And there's been a whole string, particularly of political satire, but also just kind of somewhat racy or controversial speech meant for adults, not aimed at children, that has been censored by Apple's App Store on a regular basis. And so this is somewhat troubling to those who think about, okay, as everybody is just in love with Apple and in love with these products, and if more marginal or controversial speech is being kept off of these platforms, what does that mean for democracy? And this is a question that we have not forced these companies, for the most part, to deal with. And so in closing, and we can get into a lot more of the details in the Q&A, I want to quote a journalism professor in Texas who's originally from Brazil. His name is Rosenthal Alves. And he talks about how the digital world is so different from what we had before. And he uses the analogy of a desert to describe the pre-internet age. And our economy, our way of governing, our way of organizing our lives was based around scarcity of information and long distances between information and difficulty of access. And that's how we organized our structures for governing information and how you prevent abuse, how you organize an economy, how you organize the rules of the economy. But then the rains came, and now we have a rainforest. And there are all these new organisms and completely different kind of environment that we're living in now in the internet age. And we don't have the right structures to deal with it. We need to figure out how to build a civilization in this new digital world, in this new internet age, where human rights can be protected, the weak can be protected from abuse, that crime can be fought, but at the same time, dissent is also possible, and that you can have a just and free society in which governance is accountable to the governed. Because in the pre-internet world, we've had structures for figuring out, okay, what are the checks and balances you need to hold power accountable, and prevent abuse. We never get it 100% right, but we have a basic idea of how to structure this, or how to structure an economy so that it functions in terms of how property is protected and so on. But in this internet age, with borders collapsing and information moving so quickly, for the reasons I described earlier, we don't have a good way of holding the abuse of power accountable. We haven't figured that out yet. And it's really up to particularly people in democracies to lead the way in figuring this out, because if we can't figure it out in democracies, it's going to be much harder for people who are fighting for freedom, fighting for rights around the world, to continue to be able to use the internet to speak truth to power and to demand their rights. And in closing, I just want to say, it's not a matter of, is the internet helping the good guys more than the bad guys? It's a matter of, how do we ensure that the internet evolves in a manner that is compatible with democracy and is compatible with human rights? Because the internet is not just like the air or water. It is the way it is because human beings made a series of decisions and continue to make a series of programming decisions, engineering decisions, legislative decisions. Users are making decisions about what to use and not to use and how to use it. And so the future of the internet, it's not some inevitable technological, inevitable thing, inevitable result. It depends on us. It depends on whether we take responsibility for the internet that we want to have and where it's going, whether we're in government, whether we're in companies, whether we're citizens and users of technology, whether we're investors or consumers, that we need to take responsibility, we need to take action, and only then will we get the internet that we want. And with that, I'll stop, and we can have a discussion. So thank you. Please.